and some other guy.
Welcome to the College Complex. This is our 484th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a different speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give our speaker an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, remind the interrupter, listen only one fool at a time, one of our rules. And we have questions and answers from the audience of the speaker, not speeches. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in the audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said for or against. And our speaker gets the last word, gets a comment goes to me, and that's how it works. But before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements? Want to make announcements? Take one up here.
I have 2 announcements.
All right. Come on up here and make them.
They're just social. Nothing heavy.
Not socialist.
Well, that would be First Unitarian, this Thursday's having a potluck at the church. Anyone who's interested in coming, please let me know, and I'll turn in your name and number. The church will provide the turkeys, etc. People will bring something to share. So if you're interested in that for Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, 12 noon is when it begins, let me know. I'm doing my annual Christmas party on Christmas Day. I will leave the invitations right there by me at the back table. If you're interested in coming, you are most welcome to come. Those are 2 very heavy announcements.
Christmas Day of the workhouse. Snow was falling fast.
Dallas Philosopher's Forum is meeting this Tuesday at a Boca's restaurant in Richardson, 75 in Bellarmine, and the speaker will be talking about the philosophy of science fiction, which should be pretty interesting. You could probably write a book about that. But anyway, just welcome you to come, $5 to hear the lecture, and the food's good.
Any other announcements? Now we got an announcement. Come on.
Could you turn the light down so it's not shining? Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Now's the time.
Telling us what they think of it.
Okay, next week is addressing the U.S. The U.S. Constitution doesn't work for everyone. That's Lorraine Keach. She's sitting right there. She'll be our speaker next week. Wait for Lorraine. All right.
Next week we all.
No, next week we're off. Excuse me. November 30th, there's no meeting due to Thanksgiving weekend, you know, so you got a week off. You're free. And December 7th is Lorraine Keach. December 14th, I don't have it on here yet, but it's Jim Gateway's going to talk about Slats Rogers and Love Field Lunatics. He says it's good for this time of year. It ought to be good. Anyway, he'll be talking about that on December 14th. That'll be the last meeting of the year. Then we'll be off for Christmas and New Year's. Our speaker tonight is Kenneth Williams. He's the president of RDC, the Rowlett Democratic Club. He's going to talk about the party of not, how the 2 wings of the Democratic Party must fly or sync together. To discuss the nature of the Democratic Party, its 2 major factions, Centrists and Progressives, and argue how they need to work together to win in 2020. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Kenneth Williams. It's all yours.
Thank you, Tom. And thank everyone for
Let me take
coming
that
out
out.
tonight. Oh, sure, you can take that. For the Democratic Party, Will Rogers said a famous joke that he's not a member of any organized political party. He's a Democrat, and that kind of holds true for today. And I'll touch on some of why that's true for the Democratic Party and also kind of give some things that, or at least insights that I think would help the Democratic Party to win in 2020. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about tonight, give you a basic outline. I'm going to talk about why America has a two-party system, and I'll explain why the Democratic Party is kind of the natural political home for everyone who is sort of left of center. Talk about how the nature of the Democratic coalition is larger and more diverse than the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party is composed of two major factions, and I'll talk about those factions. And I'll explain why those factions need to unite in order to win in 2020. And I'll talk about some strategies for Democratic victory. Now, America has a two-party system, and this has been bemoaned for years by lots of people. Say, oh, why do we have this two-party system? Oh, man, this doesn't give us any choice. I don't like the Republicans. I don't like the Democrats. None of them are any good. But yet, the two-party system goes on, despite the fact that there are always lots of criticisms of that system. Well, I believe the reason why we have a two-party system is because of the structure of our Constitution. What our Constitution does is it has a representation that's based on specific geographic locations, and the elections are run on a winner-take-all basis based on those geographic locations. By contrast, if you look at a parliamentary system, representation is proportionate to the popular vote. So, to see why that's such a critical idea, let's say if you were in Italy, and if 20% of the Italians vote for the Socialist Party, if that were to happen, you would end up with about 20% representation in their parliament for the Socialist Party. Now let's imagine for a minute that 20% of all Americans were socialists. And let's imagine this 20% is spread evenly through every congressional district. Let's say it was actually a Socialist Party and it was on the ballot, you could vote for it. And let's say we had good turnout from these socialist supporters and they voted for their party. How many seats would they have in Congress? Probably 0. They would have no seats in Congress, even though they had 20% of the population. Now, this pattern makes third parties it's very difficult to have a third party be a viable party in America because of this pattern, because of that winner-take-all based on geography. See, to be competitive, an American political party, and when I say to be competitive, I mean to have a chance of actually winning control of the government. The American political party must have the ability to win a majority of the vote in a majority of the congressional districts. So when you think about that for a moment, there's 435 congressional districts, and think of how big this country is, how many people it has. And then further, the political party can't have all its supporters in California. They have to be spread throughout the whole country to have a chance to win control of the Senate. And American elections are very expensive. I believe in the United Kingdom, they run a campaign, I think there's some set period of time, like 6 weeks, 5 weeks, even shorter than I thought. So that kind of limits how many resources you're gonna have to put into an election in the United Kingdom. Here, you might have to start running 2 years in advance, takes tremendous amounts of money. For a third party to do all of that, and then to end up with 0 seats in Congress, you're not going to do it more than one time. You're probably not even going to be able to do it one time. And the resources it would take to do that for that third party, they're going to be comparable to the resources it takes the Republican Party to run a campaign, comparable to what it takes the Democratic Party to run a campaign. The bottom line is, there ain't enough resources to sustain 3 parties at the same time that all have a chance of winning. You end up with a situation where the maximum number of political parties that at any given time is going to be viable in America is going to be 2. However much, you can have 50 million other parties. We have the Green Party, the Libertarian Party. There's an interesting little party up in New York State called the Working Families Party. There's all kinds of parties. None of these parties has a serious chance of getting control of Congress or winning the state legislatures in the various states. And notice I keep talking about the legislature. Why am I not talking about the president or the governor? Running for the executive office can kind of give you the illusion that third parties are viable. Jesse Ventura won governor of Minnesota. I guarantee you whatever party he was working with doesn't run Minnesota now, okay? Because you need broad-based support and resources to compete in this kind of system. Basically, you're only going to have 2 parties that can do that at a given time in history. Now, because of this fact, or this pattern that I see here, the Democratic Party becomes kind of a default home for everybody whose politics is left of center. And that includes everybody from Joe Manchin to Bernie Sanders, and people who might be a little bit to the left of them or a little bit to the right of them. So long as it's left of the center point of the imaginary center point of American politics, the Democratic Party is going to be your home. Why? Because if you want laws passed, if you want policies changed in the government, you need a vehicle, you need a political party. So even some folks, because there are a lot of folks on the left who don't like the Democratic Party, for example, if they want to get the policies passed that they want, their vehicle is going to be the Democratic Party because it sure isn't going to be the Republican Party. And so that makes it a home for everybody on the left, including people who are actually operating outside of the Democratic Party. If anyone, so that's basically why the Democratic Party is a home of people on the left. Now, the Democratic Party is a real interesting coalition in American politics, and you got to think of it as a coalition. It is a really broad and diverse coalition. It's a larger coalition than the Republican Party. About 48% of Americans are Democrats versus about 44% who are Republicans. Democrats have won the popular vote in 6 out of 7 of the last presidential elections. Now, the Democratic Party, we talked a little bit about the ideological diversity in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is also more diverse ethnically. About 40% of Democrats are non-white minorities. The Republican Party, by contrast, still has about 89% of its membership is native whites. Now, the Democratic Party has 2 major factions. There's lots of ways you can slice and dice the Democratic Party. I'm not saying these are the only ways you can divide it up or analyze it, but there are 2 major factions that affect how the Democratic Party works in primary elections and how it works together. And these are what I'm calling the centrists. That's kind of our more moderate Democrats, and progressives, Democrats who kind of aim for more, let's say, more significant change versus the centrists. The centrists tend to favor moderate changes. The centrist wing of the Democratic Party strongly supports bipartisanship. Just as an observation, that particular faction of the Democratic Party, I think, supports bipartisanship more than any other part of American politics. They support it way more than the Republicans who they plan to work with. But they believe in it strongly. I've talked to some Democratic centrist politicians. They all proudly talk about their ability to reach across the aisle and work with the Republicans. You don't hear many Republican politicians advertising their political strength that way, but centrist politicians on the Democratic side are very much in favor of bipartisanship, which I'm not saying, just an observation. The other thing about centrist Democrats is they emphasize their ability to, quote unquote, get things done. We can get things done. I can make the trains run on time. I can make things happen. I can accomplish things. You'll hear pretty much that's a typical thing that centrist Democrats emphasize. Progressives emphasize the need to make systemic changes. When they look, their analysis of society is that we need broad, structural, systemic changes in order to really achieve things for people. And the other thing about the progressives is they tend to be more critical of, say, big corporations and the wealthy. They're a little bit more critical of that part of society. One thing I want to say about progressives and centrists, I'm presenting it here like those are two neatly separated factions. It's not quite that neat. It's more of a shades of gray kind of thing. What will happen is one person's centrist is somebody else's progressive. If you ask Nancy Pelosi what she is, she says she's a progressive. If you ask AOC what she is, she'll say she's a centrist or whatever. She'll describe Nancy Pelosi as a centrist. So it's a shades of gray, it's a shades of gray kind of question. But it does reflect a real tension within the Democratic Party. Now, the Democratic Party over in recent years has become more progressive. And so according to a recent CBS poll, about 62% of Democrats describe themselves as liberal or very liberal. About 33% describes themselves as moderate or conservative. When Bill Clinton was president, only about 25% of Democrats described themselves as liberal. There were 25% who described themselves as conservatives. About 48% of the rest described themselves as moderate. This is back in the 1990s, Bill Clinton's presidency. By 2018, 51% of Democrats were describing themselves as liberals, only 13% were describing themselves as conservatives, and 34% were describing themselves as moderates. And the centrists have been running the Democratic Party since the 1970s. The growth of the progressives creates a challenge and possible division in the Democratic Party. Now, some of the reasons why the progressive wing of the party has been growing is because of issues like income inequality, healthcare costs has been a major focus, the student loan debt problem, and climate change. These are problems which have, in a sense, pulled more people over to the left as they haven't seen credible solutions either coming from the Republicans or even from the centrist wing of the Democratic Party. Now, in 2016, Bernie Sanders championed kind of a progressive protest on these very issues, and he got the votes of 43% of Democrats in the primary that year. 2016 shows us why it's so important for Democrats to unite. In 2016, Hillary Clinton lost the election to Donald Trump despite winning the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes. Most analysis of this loss is focused on swing voters who switched from Obama to Trump. That's most of the time they keep talking about, people who were Obama voters and switched to Trump. That's where most of the discussion that you'll hear from journalists, they'll keep talking about that group of people. There are at least two other important ways to analyze the Democratic loss. Democrats had a third-party candidate on the left, Jill Stein, in 2016. Now, if you look at Donald Trump's margin of victory in the key states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, in each of those states, the number of votes that Jill Stein got was larger than the margin of Donald Trump's victory. Think about that for a minute. In each one of those states, she got more votes than the difference between the votes that Donald Trump got and Hillary Clinton got. Then there's another way of looking at what happened in the loss in 2016. the African American vote nationally went from 66.6% of eligible voters in 2012 down to 59.6% of eligible voters in 2016. In the particular states we're talking about, in some of those states, the drop was even larger. In Michigan, it was 12.4%. African American vote was down 12.4%. Pennsylvania was down 2.1%. In Wisconsin, it was down 12.3%. Okay, now that's not even counting what we just talked about with Jill Stein. That's in addition to. And the African American population is the most reliably Democratic voting portion of the Democratic coalition. So if you don't get the people who are most reliable to show up and vote for you, that's a big problem. One thing that, speaking on that particular issue, when opponents of the Democratic Party, that is to say Republicans, want to cause problems for the Democrats in the electorate, they write laws. I believe in the federal case in North Carolina, the judge said they had designed their voter ID laws with surgical precision to restrain the number of African American voters, right? They targeted that population. And with the internet campaign that the Russians used in 2016, they also targeted African American voters to discourage them from turning out to vote. So I bring up this point to say that apparently the Republicans and the Russians realize that Democrats need African American voters. The Democrats need to realize that, because they have to do a better job of getting that vote turned out. They need to do a better job of protecting that vote if they want to win. Now, now looking back at 2016, there was a possibility that Hillary Clinton could have made a decision which would have made, in my opinion, a big difference in her chances of winning. She couldn't control the media stories about the email server. She couldn't control the Russian dumps of email from WikiLeaks. She couldn't control that FBI Director James Comey 3 times made critical statements about her during the election. She couldn't control any of that. But there was something else that she could control. She could pick her own running mate. Nobody could control that. That was totally under her control. And when she picked her running mate, she selected a fellow centrist, Tim Kaine. She had that side of the party's support. She picked another person who was in the same camp as herself. And she did it in a year where there had been a significant, I mean, the Bernie folks, they were like, it was a movement. They were ready for the revolution. I was a delegate for Hillary Clinton in 2016. I saw up close the anger and the disappointment that Bernie supporters had that he didn't win the nomination, right? That was a big deal. Hillary Clinton treated it like it was business as usual. Like we have a safe election and I can pick Tim Kaine because that's who I'm most comfortable with. Obama got to pick who he was comfortable with, so I'm going to pick Tim Kaine because that's who I'm comfortable with. That was not the time to do that. She should have, to maximize her chances of winning, I'm not saying that guaranteed that she would have won, but the strongest move she could have made to win would have been to persuade Bernie Sanders to be her vice presidential candidate. That would have been the way to unite the Democratic Party in 2016. She didn't see the need. She didn't see that path or perhaps the need to do that, but that was the move to make. And this is not as crazy a move as you think it is. Lots of times, presidential candidates in a primary who seem to be at odds with each other during the primary have formed alliances in order to win. One of the famous ones for the Democratic Party is John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson couldn't stand John Kennedy, but they wanted to win, so they formed a unified ticket. Another example on the Republican side is Ronald Reagan and George H. Bush. George H. Bush is the one who gave us the phrase voodoo economics. That was not something a liberal lefty said about Ronald Reagan's economic plan. That's what George H. Bush said when he was running in competition against Ronald Reagan. But they united and they won. Hillary Clinton should have been seeing that election in those kind of terms. She didn't, and we know what happened. I believe the Democrats of this year need to develop a coalition ticket along the same lines that I'm describing from what I would have recommended in 2016. Because when you look at the Democratic Party, remember, we have a two-party system. You got to go back to that. In reality, there's nowhere to go. The progressives in the Democratic Party aren't going anywhere. You're not gonna quote unquote get rid of them, and you wouldn't really want to. And at the same time, they can't really achieve what they want outside of the Democratic Party. The centrists aren't going anywhere. Same deal. They're not going to be able to get the things that they believe in if the Democratic Party is not successful. The party will need the enthusiastic support of both wings to win in 2020. The solution is to have both wings represented on the 2020 ticket. So we need a ticket that includes running mates who represent both of those wings. Some examples would be a Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren ticket, a Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar ticket, a Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker ticket, or a Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg ticket. There has to be a compromise among Democrats on the health care plan. I've listened to the narrative journalists are making about Elizabeth Warren's health care plan, and that is what they're gunning for. That is going to be the target in terms of policy in the 2020 election. Democrats need to think about that. They can't just say, well, it's really the best idea, so we'll just push it through because don't get me wrong, I believe in Medicare for all. I support Medicare for all. I don't know that you're going to be able to do Medicare for all when you have a 3-alarm fire or 4-alarm fire of trying to get Donald Trump out of the White House. So you have to prioritize what is it you want to do. Because Donald Trump wins re-election, you're not only not going to get Medicare for all, you may end up with the Affordable Care Act being repealed or gotten rid of. You could end up with Medicare for, let us say, fewer people than currently get it, right? Because now they can try to roll it back and take it away from, because there's been proposals floating around for years that they want to raise the Medicare age to 67 or some higher number instead of getting it at 65. These kinds of things are going to be on the table if Republicans control the government after 2020. So job one is to win. So when we look at the healthcare plan, in order to come up with a unified healthcare plan, maybe it needs to be somewhat to the right of what Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders would want, but it might have to be to the left of what Joe Biden or Amy Klobuchar might want. You need to come to a unified plan. And this is something, and again, for my Democratic centrist friends there, one of your strong points is you say you have the ability to reach across the aisle and work with Republicans. Okay, before you try to do that, reach across the aisle of your own political party and work with the other people who are in that same party. Because if you don't do that, you won't get a chance to reach across the aisle and work with Mitch McConnell. Not that Mitch McConnell was going to work with you anyway if you reach across the aisle, let's be realistic. But in order to be even in a position to contemplate that, you need to unify and win. Party needs to do a much better job of turning out some of its core constituencies, especially African Americans and other constituencies, including Latinos, Asian Americans, young people, and poor people. You can't just say, well, we're going to do some TV commercials and we hope that works. That doesn't work in all kinds of communities. right? People aren't watching the TV channel where you put the commercial on. Their barriers to voting are not. That doesn't necessarily work for them, you know. Maybe you should be advertising on the Spanish-speaking channel to reach more people in the Hispanic community. Maybe you need to actually give people rides to the polls. Maybe you need to help people register to vote and to get through barriers that have been created on purpose by Republicans through various voter ID laws. You need to do those kind of things. If Democrats do these things, if they do these other approaches, try to protect their left flank, pull those people back home to the Democratic Party as opposed to going for some kind of third party protests, get your ethnic base turned out. These are people who vote for the Democrats anyway. See, when you're trying to get that African American voter who came out to vote for Obama in 2012 and stayed home in 2016, you don't have to talk him into voting for the Democratic Party. You just have to give them a motivation to show up this time. The strategy that most people talk about on TV is about flipping Trump's voters back to the Democratic Party. Well, that's just an argument there. It may be a fruitless argument because Trump's voters, most of them aren't going anywhere from the Republican Party, according to what you look at in polling or whatever. That's actually the harder path. The Democratic coalition is inherently larger. Get it to show up. That's how Obama won in 2008 and 2012. If you do that in 2020, and if we unite, then you're going to have the ability to win. Trump is beatable. The Democrats won the House elections in 2018 midterms by more than 9 million votes. So this is not just, what I'm talking about is not something that, you know, is a pie in the sky deal. This is doable. We kind of just did it last year in the midterm elections. The Democrats won statewide elections in those key states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin in 2018. Unity and high turnout are the keys to Democratic victory. If the two wings work together, they can fly. Yeah.
So what you seem to be saying is that you should really forget about the deplorables that Hillary Clinton dubbed them.
I would never use that term. I'm not here to pick fights with the people that don't want to vote for the Democrats. I'm trying to get the Democrats to focus on the people who do want to vote.
Well, what I mean to say by that, these were white working class people that would normally vote for Democrat, but they felt so left behind actually and ignored when Trump came. I think that's why Trump appealed to them so much, because he was the only one that said, okay, I'm going to take care of you.
Okay. I hear your question. I want to push back a little bit. Democrats have not won white working class people since 1964. They don't normally vote for Democrats. That's the last time that Democrats won a majority of white people. Democrats have lost that demographic since Lyndon Johnson passed the Civil Rights Bill, and it's never come back. So, and that's something to think about as you're working on that group. I'm not saying you shouldn't try to invite people back. Hey, I invite everybody back. I think we want everybody to come on in. But when you're allocating your resources, you want your best return on investment. And I'm not sure that demographic is the best return on investment for Democrats. Notably, when we've seen in the 2018 election, Democrats didn't get a big movement on so-called white working class people, but they did get movement on Republicans with college-educated Republicans. Several of them, there's been movement of those kind of folks in the suburbs toward the Democratic Party. So we need to look at where we're going to actually be most successful.
But would you not agree that what happened in Lordstown, Ohio, closing down the GM plant, direct result of Trump's action, actually, in overturning the requirement for small vehicles as opposed to SUVs. Now that was really, that's what closed down the plant.
Right.
So he's really betrayed them. So.
And that's true, but see, one thing, and again, this is not to slight anybody or whatever, but there's a pattern I see in the media, right? It's what I call the 40-90 rule. The media talks about 40% of the electorate 90% of the time. The Trump base this, the Trump base that. What did the Trump base want? How do they feel? What do they think now? Do they still like Trump? And meanwhile, there's 60% of the electorate that we're not talking about. This presentation is about that 60%. And it's okay, if we have questions or we want to discuss the Trump base, we can still, but that's not who this presentation is about. It's about the coalition that votes for the Democratic Party, that coalition that put Barack Obama in office, and which I think can win, that won the election in 2018, made Nancy Pelosi the Speaker of the House, and I think they can win in 2020. We need to focus on the people who actually support us.
I just want to follow up on the question that John raised. I think that was a bad calculation on part of Mr. Clinton to use that term at that time, at any time, really. And I think that's what he was alluding to. I don't think he was said it was a major. There was something that disturbed me as a person, and I think that's what it was. But my question is, the Democratic Party has always been divided. In the South, particularly Texas, the conservatives against the liberals for years and years. And actually, Governor Perry won election by just saying Sanchez was too liberal. He didn't say nothing else worth it. And some way or another, I think our work polls, and a large number of people don't know the difference between a primary and a general election. They want to come to a primary and vote a straight ticket. With all the social groups we have in the community, we ought to be able to ensure that everybody is educated on the issues and which election and what you got to do like that. And I think that's what we need. I'm asking, do you think that will help Democrats?
Well, yeah, we definitely need to work with the grassroots people to get them educated as to what's required to vote, what identification they need, what registration. We need to work at that level. We need to concentrate on that level to turn out as many voters as possible. Definitely. That's exactly what I'm talking about that we need to do. Let's work with the Democratic base. Yes.
And to that end, and being involved in the political scene, how many states have you looked at potentially that did the same thing that our Secretary of State did last year by trying to say 60-odd thousand people, they ripped the names off the rolls and stuff like that. We all understand the dirty tricks played on getting the right to vote. But how many others, and the House has been clear, it's like 5 names came up that
Right.
said they were double voted or shouldn't be on the rolls for whatever reason. So this disenfranchisement comes in many forms and flavors. How many or how much notice is the Democratic and the Republican Party going to get in advance that such nonsense is in the horizon throughout the country?
Now, I have no idea how many states we know that these provisions have been done in certain states that are controlled by Republicans, particularly in southern states, which is why under the Voting Rights Act, there used to be something called pre-clearance to prevent these kinds of actions. When the Supreme Court struck down pre-clearance, it opened it up so that they could do these kinds of things that have a negative effect on minority voters and voters who are being targeted essentially by these provisions. Now, the way I look at that, that's the environment we're in. We shouldn't be in that environment. It's unjust, but that's the environment we're in. The Democrats have to look at that and come up with realistic ways to fight it, quite simply. Stacey Abrams over in Georgia, who in all likelihood would have won the gubernatorial election without the really aggressive voter suppression tactics used by the person who was running against her, who was the Secretary of State of Georgia at the time. He's kicking voters off the roll at the same time he's running for governor. Like,
Yeah.
do you think that could be a conflict of interest? But he was allowed to do it, and because of that, he ends up winning, right? We have to counteract that, and the way you counteract it is you're just going to have to you can't just file lawsuits and fight these provisions that way. That's good, you have to do that, but you have to get out there on the ground, work with people, take them by the hand, get them registered to vote, help them. See, because voter suppression tactics operate like a poll tax, right? You say everybody has to have ID in order to vote, but the people who are in their coalition already have the ID that they've defined as being necessary, and the people that are in the Democratic coalition, a significant percentage of them don't have that ID. And they've studied that. They figured that out before they passed the law. This is why you have things that are kind of contradictory in these laws, like saying, here in Texas, your concealed gun permit, you can vote with that. Your college ID, you can't vote with that. There's no real rationale for why you can't vote for with a college ID other than college students tend to vote for the Democratic Party. Therefore, we prefer to have fewer of them voting. Therefore, it's not a legitimate form of ID. There's no rationale that you can make about ID that says this particular ID is no good, but somehow other forms of ID like passports are good, because sometimes they'll use the rationale that, well, a college ID doesn't have an address on it. Guess what? A passport doesn't have an address on it. A VA card doesn't have an address on it. And they accept all those cards because they think those constituencies are going to be a little bit more Republican friendly, and they think college students will be less so, therefore. But these kinds of patterns and rules, this is being done throughout the country. You need to expect this to be done on steroids in 2020 because Republicans can count too. And they're seeing the same numbers I'm seeing. There's a reason why they make these laws. Because they have a coalition that's a little smaller than the Democratic Party. And the way to win in that instance, because they're not doing a lot to try to persuade these people to come their way, is to try to suppress that vote. The Democrats need to be focused like a laser beam on counteracting that.
Yeah, but I just wondered, there must be, that there's no federal override. Just like you have to have your name.
Donald Trump's in charge of the federal government.
Yeah.
That answers the
We know
federal
that
override
doesn't corrupt
question.
us all out.
Yeah.
But there should be some date, like just like you have to have your name on a ballot.
I don't know.
Secretary of State.
That I don't know that information. That'll probably vary state by state. I don't know all the rules on that for the various states. I just don't know. But you're right, that information's out there. We need to be looking at that. I personally don't know all of those dates where.
And if voter ID is required in a special format, okay, why aren't these states being pushed? This is your law. It's up to you to give every citizen the right to take advantage of the problem, and then send vans around to neighborhoods that are in, for them to jump through hoops to meet this law they never asked for in the first place.
Yeah, and there's this is being done by grassroots groups. It's being done by probably to some degree by the Democratic Party. It's not going to be done by the federal government. That's completely unrealistic in this political environment. This is not a federal government that's going to try to help more people vote. That's not their thing.
No. Disgusting.
Question I'd like to ask, please. Question I'd like to ask is, you didn't mention the independent voters.
Okay.
The people that are like me,
Yeah.
who are not registered in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, okay? The question I'd like, how many percent of the voting population are, in your opinion, independents?
Okay, I'm gonna do the math. It said 48% were Democrats, 44% were Republicans. That's 92%. So I would say 8% are independents. According just on those numbers that I did quote in the presentation, but I didn't talk about independents as a separate group. In our system, but let me comment on what I think of the concept of an independent voter in our system. In our system, like I said, it's a two-party system. If you want to have laws changed or you want to change government policies, you at the end of the day, you got to vote for one of the political parties that's going to end up in control of the government. Under our system, and the interesting thing about the two-party system, this is not designed in the Constitution. The Founding Fathers didn't even believe in political parties. This is inadvertently how it works. In our system, you end up with two parties, it's Democrats and Republicans. So if independents want to influence government policy, in the end of the day, they're going to vote for either the Democrats or the Republicans.
Yeah, I mean,
What-
I'm not talking about the independents as being a separate party.
No, I'm not saying you are. But go ahead, I'm sorry, sir, go ahead.
Well, I've heard the percentage of independents is much higher than 8%.
But here's my point. It doesn't matter, and from my point of view, what percentage of the people are independents. Independence is saying you're not comfortable with either political party. You don't want to be a registered voter of Republicans or Democrats. That's basically what the statement you're making when you're an independent. Am I wrong on that?
No, I don't agree with that.
Oh, I'm not? Okay. So what is
Independent is going to vote the way that he or she thinks.
Well, everyone is.
Which is going to be best for the country.
Well, I mean, but everyone believes that. And people who vote for the Republican Party all the time think they're voting what they think and they're voting for what's best for the country. People who vote Democratic all the time think the same thing. That's not unique to independent voters. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, even though you don't share their perspective, can you? I mean, just imagine that in the shoes of the other person who's a Democrat, that they are voting for what they think is best for the country also. I believe everybody who votes is voting for what they think is best for the country, in my opinion.
Maybe. But it seems to me there's an awful lot of people that vote because that's the way their families have voted,
I mean, that's
culture
the,
and everything.
and if that's true, that those aren't mutually exclusive. If I vote the way my family votes, I might believe that my family has made a good choice about voting. Those are not mutually exclusive. A person who votes differently from you with a different philosophy can believe just as sincerely as you do that they're voting for the best of the country. And they can also believe just as sincerely as you do that they're voting based on what they think. That is not unique to independent voters.
No, I'm not saying it is.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I tend to somewhat disagree. I think that the major factor actually in the election is the Rust Belt, actually, and these people feeling neglected. And I think the fact of the matter is both parties tended to actually disregard them, actually. They've never really, there's been no policy, no industrial policy or anything. And so these people, now there's tremendous social strife, but with opium prices and so on. And so that, I think, to be candid, I think that's sort of a major problem. I mean, they lost in that region, really, by 70,000 votes, right? So,
Right.
and I think that was the fundamental reason. These people felt left behind. They felt no party supported them, just ignored them, actually. And Trump managed to tap into that.
Well, I mean, that what you're saying is the popular wisdom. That's what most commentators and analysts say. And what I'm saying is something different. I showed you by numbers that even with the same way those people in Rust Belt felt, Hillary Clinton would have won if African Americans showed up in the same numbers they showed in 2012. Despite everything, let's assume everything you're saying is true. She still would have won if those other voters showed up, or if the Jill Stein voters voted for her. And the reason why I want to change the focus from what you're talking about is the Democrats are not going to get elected by conservative white males in the Midwest. They might think they are, they're not going to win that way. They need to work with constituencies that actually support them. And if they don't, if they want to fight it out with Trump for his voters, okay, well, Trump will probably win that fight. But if they fight it out for their own voters, for their own base, if they start, you say these people in the Midwest are neglected. Well, African Americans who live in the inner city are neglected. Lots of people are neglected. They didn't vote for Trump. So being neglected is not, and again, you want to talk about Trump's base, I'm talking about the Democratic base. And the Democrats are going to they're going to win with the Democratic base or not. But they're not going to win with Trump's base. That's absolutely true. Trump's base is going to vote for Trump. They need to concentrate on the people who actually want to vote for the Democratic Party. And if they do that, they can win. They did it in 2018, they did it in 2008, they did it in 2012. It's doable. And they didn't do it by saying, well, we're going to concentrate on, the people who are most adverse to the Democratic Party, trying to flip them over. Flipping Republicans is a whole lot more difficult than it is to galvanize your own base, in my opinion.
Kenneth, as
Yes.
it relates to courting, let's just stick with the black vote right now.
Right.
Because Hispanics and women and a lot of other issues involved. What do you think it really is going to take for the black vote to come out if say, a Buttigieg wins the primary? What is it going to take to get the blacks to show up for him because they want a Democrat in office, even if it comes down to the black and white, you pardon the pun, of throwing Trump out, okay, of office alone, even if it's on that. But
okay, to talk about that specific candidate, if Buttigieg is not going to win the primary and then say, well, how can I get black voters? In the Democratic primary, you can't win if you don't get black voters in the primary. So Buttigieg will either have that problem solved before he, quote, wins the primary, or he won't have it solved and he won't win the primary.
yes, but do you find the black turnout at primaries has changed dramatically over the years?
Well, it depends on what election you're talking
Well, I'm not
about.
talking of South Carolina.
No, 2008, 2012, it's high. Obviously, there was a drop-off in 2016. So, but we saw a few years ago in Alabama, blacks came out and elected a Democratic senator in Alabama. In Louisiana, a few weeks ago, a Democratic governor won re-election. So, what I think is needed is to, when you want to get people's vote, you work with them to get them to come out to vote. I've been a member of the Texas Coalition of Black Democrats. When they met at the convention, and they have caucuses for different groups or whatever. One of the things black Democrats talk about is that the Democratic Party doesn't pay enough attention to them. It doesn't provide resources. It doesn't. There are black radio stations where they can advertise the Democratic Party. They don't put enough money into that. They look at African Americans. They say, well, 90% of them vote for us, so we don't have to do anything. That's not true. And we saw that in 2016. Because people. Just because a constituency supports you doesn't mean they show up on election day. And that's particularly true among some constituencies among African Americans. Some of them think, well, we vote in the presidential election, we can take the congressional election, no need to vote that year because Obama's already in office, we can stay home. That's a big factor in why Republicans had big gains in 2010 and 2014, because people vote intermittently. The intermittent voter is a big factor for the Democrats. Big factor.
And why do you think that they don't understand that they need to get out of it?
Well, see,
And voters in general, but particularly black voters.
Well, it's not just black voters. Young people have the same pattern. There's a lot of people in the Democratic Party who have that pattern as compared to the Republican Party. Usually why Republicans have better turnout in off-year elections. Because there's a whole lot of folks in the Democratic coalition who, because there's this identification with the president, if the president's running this a big important election and these other people aren't as important. Republicans have a better understanding that you need the whole government, you need the legislature, you need the state legislatures, you need dog catcher, you need the school board, you need all of that. There's a little bit more sophistication in general, I would say, between the two voting blocks. But when the Democrats do show up, if they all show up, it's more people.
And overall, do you think that say, if you look at the demographics of the Democratic
Yeah.
Party, what do you think, looking at the demographics, women are more progressive than moderate?
Well,
Versus blacks, are they more moderate?
I haven't looked at, I haven't gone into those, those different subgroups and see how many of them are progressive and how many of them are moderate. There's going to be progressives and moderates within those subgroups as well, of course, and conservatives in those subgroups. There's going to be some black conservatives. There's going to be a variety of views in every community. No community is a monolith, even within the umbrella of the Democratic Party, as I'm sure there are differences among various factions of even Republicans. So I don't know if that's the level you need to work on. I think you just need to make sure you're reaching out to these communities and putting resources on the ground to get people organized, to get people to turn out.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, would you care to comment on the fact that the African American vote seems to like Biden a lot now? If he is besmirched in this impeachment deal, how do you think that will affect the election?
That's a real interesting question. That really is. I'm not sure how that works out. Some of it depends upon how the media handles it. The media in 2016 treated an email server in Hillary Clinton's basement as though it was a bigger threat to the country than an attack by Russia on our electoral system. They treated those like same, or maybe the email server is a bigger threat, which makes no sense in retrospect. But however, that's kind of what they did. If the media makes Hunter Biden, I certainly think President Trump's objective in this whole Ukraine thing was to make Hunter Biden the email server of 2020. That's his objective.
That's right.
If the media kind of just blindly goes along with that, you could have the same kind of confusion among the electorate. Well, Trump did all these bad things, but that Joe Biden, he's a crook. But let me make one comment on Joe Biden. This is just my personal perception of him. Any guy who in the U.S. Senate rides mass transportation to go to work is not a corrupt guy. Trust me. I mean, because that's not how corrupt people roll. That's not how they roll. They're not riding. If Biden really cared about money, he'd be doing something else. And so it's not a real serious attack on him in reality, but Lindsey Graham and other people are going to pretend it is. Now, how the media reacts and how the Democrats react will be important. If Democrats develop a coalition ticket where the various factions feel they have some investment in the ticket, it kind of won't matter what they say, because again, these attacks work if people react to it by staying home or react to it by voting for Jill Stein. If the people don't get caught up in that, they can say anything they want, because again, the people in the end will have the last word. So long as we stay focused and just get out there and do what we need to do.
I think one problem among the, I don't know whether it's just African American community or not, but I have had some people to say that they voted for Ms. Clinton and she still lost, even though she won 3 million, she had 3 million or whatever votes. Could you comment on how we perhaps could educate our African Americans on the Electoral College?
Well,
And what part does it play in this whole thing?
well, we need to educate not African Americans, but the whole population on the electoral college. That's an issue that I think, it's the deal we have. Those are the rules right now. And so we have to operate within those rules. The reason why in my presentation I talked specifically about Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin was those were the places that gave Donald Trump an electoral college victory. That's why I concentrated on those 3 states. And if you look at the data, right, and if you understand, well, hey, this is really big drop, and particularly in Michigan and Wisconsin, in the African American vote, it drops by more than 12% in both of those states. And if you look at Jill Stein's votes, victory was within her grasp with a different strategy. And let's say she did 2 things. Had Bernie Sanders on the ticket, that would shave most of those Jill Stein votes back toward the Democrats. Then, if you actually got out there and knocked on doors with African Americans and really acted like you really were focused and concerned with them, and told them, okay, I get elected, Flint, Michigan, water system gets fixed in 6 months. Turnout in Michigan for African Americans would look different, I believe. And at the time, what was the Republican governor of Wisconsin? Scott was in there, and he had implemented some voter suppression type laws in Wisconsin, which I think partly explains the drop in African American turnout in Wisconsin, and it was also some of that in Michigan as well. But Democrats need to more aggressively push back against stuff. If they tell you somebody's got to buy a birth certificate in order to get a voter ID, and somebody works for $9 an hour, well, paying $50 or $75 for a birth certificate is a big deal. Consider buying that birth certificate for them. You know, pay their poll tax. This is a poll tax. We will know it's a poll tax. We know what a poll tax did historically. These things are just poll taxes. They are designed to do the same thing poll taxes are to do, and they are targeted toward the same parts of the population. So Democrats need to aggressively try to counteract that, put dollars behind it, put people on the ground behind it. And if you do that, I think you can counteract those things. Even with the bad laws in place, you can protect people's right to vote, but you have to really mean it. And just putting all the money into putting commercials on TV, again, that doesn't affect those kind of folks. Go to where they are. Go to where your voters are. Thank you.
I think we're out of questions. You get to sit down.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Now it's your turn to talk, so whoever wants to get up here and respond to what the speaker said, either for or against, you got 5 minutes. Come on up here.
I want to thank you for your report. I made a similar report, and you covered it a little different from me, and I broadened my own horizons. I agree with most of what you said. I know that, I guess my take on those 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, is probably different from yours. I think Hillary did very little campaign in those states. And I think Hillary lost the election. And we need to learn from that mistake. Because she didn't offer anything. Any group will vote if you give them a stake in what you're doing. And what you get on the media, on these ads, that doesn't give you nobody a reason to vote. Unless you're voting ideological, and some people vote that way. So she just took the African Americans for granted. And she didn't offer them anything. So they said, well, if you don't offer me, then why should I vote for you? And I think some people thought Trump would have behaved differently in the way he has. I never thought that. So the way the system is set up with precincts, the precinct sheriff should be given some money to work with that precinct. and they already elect precinct chairs, it's gonna work. Most of the precinct chairs just hold elections. They don't do nothing to get the vote out. And so that's how the Democrats need to focus on. We really need to look at the coalition and work that coalition. If we don't do that, we could lose. We just can't assume that people are gonna vote for any Democrat other than having President Trump. And President Trump has alienated a large segment of the community. The other part, I don't agree. I think the majority of people who voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary were Republicans. I'll tell you why. His focus was on the white male who worked in heavy industry and lost a job because of outsourcing factory location. And I believe a good many of the people who voted for him in the primary were Republicans, and because he was speaking to an issue that they were dealing with. And even that, President Obama, into his State of the Union, wanted to provide money to retrain them, pay the tuition, give them a stipend to live on, and with the end of it was a job there. Republicans wouldn't fund it. She didn't even mention that. And so President Trump was talking something about bringing the jobs back. And so those people, a large number of people who voted for him in the primary, I think were not really Democrats, but they were voting for him for what he said he was going to do for them. And then when he lost, then they went for President Trump. I may be wrong. I know in the election, 53% of the white women voted for him. I don't think 53% of the white are going to vote for him this time. But we're going to have to, the Democrats got to win the election by being active, trying to educate the base about what the issues are and all these other things. Because we're going to have a problem in Texas, because you can't vote the straight Democratic ticket in Texas in 2020. You have to vote in each one. And that's because maybe we don't give some training to the people they won't vote because they don't want to go through all that stuff. So I think I think as I look at demographic groups, I think where we are economically, we behave similarly. And I never subscribe to the extent that white culture is different from my culture. And I think that's basically true, but I think some of that has been added because we have large communities of certain of minority people. And they have a subculture in that community because they're pretty much locked in. They don't get out of it. And so that affects their behavior. But I think everybody's on the same economic level probably behave 90% the same way. But that's what it is. So I think it's critical that we do something, because I think if we have 4 more years of President Trump, we're in serious, the nation's in serious trouble. He's created problems that were already fixed. He, moving the embassy to Jerusalem was a terrible mistake, I think, when you got to deal with the Palestinians. So we got to try to bring people together, not polarize them internationally. We cannot survive as isolated, and what he's doing is isolating us from the rest of the world. And we can't have that and be reasonably successful. But I thank you for your observation, and it helped me a great deal.
Again, I must say that was a very interesting presentation. I do thank you for it, and it does throw up some considerations that I think the DNC should be taken into account. I always, I always look at things as, I always look at things as on the economic front, or socio-economic front, really. And I think what happens socially really is dependent on the economics of the country. And I think there is a general realization that things have gone wrong, actually, in this country. I think there's a general angst about that Trump did tap into. Now, what's been happening is that, of course, Trump has made some major moves actually that's made things worse. And all of his promises, he's let down many people. I mean, his whole trade thing it won't work, could never work. But more to the point, all these promises he made to the Rust Belt, in fact, as I said, the Lordstown shutdown was a result of Trump's policy, actually. And also, he's cut back on things, as we know, many social programs, such as SNAP food stamps program. Now that's hurt the working people. Another thing he's done, he's cut back on adult training. Now, of course, these people that do lose their jobs need adult training. And just like Ronald Reagan before him, that's what Reagan did. This is now, why on earth he does this? He wanted to build his wall, and he's also increased the defense budget. Now, these are not things that any sane person that wants to help, promote the country and make it great again would dream of doing. And so I think, yes, I think concentrating on getting your base out is important, assuredly so. But I think Trump's major defects, apart from his character defects, which are manifest, the fact that, as I said last week, he is guilty of lèse-majesty, which is, he's acted as a traitor to this country. I mean, his fawning over Putin is obvious. Everything he's done because, in fact, Putin is his paymaster. He's made such a mess of his life over here. He's borrowed millions, billions and billions and lost them all. I mean, he is a financial disaster in his doings. And so he reaches out to these oligarchs and Putin. And so he's just basically, as Tony Blair was called, he was called W's patsy. And I think, again, you could say that Trump is the same thing to Putin. I mean, everything he does supports Russian policies. And it's evident in I think just on that alone, he should be attacked. So I don't, getting out the base is wonderful, but I think Trump has so many defects that you could get up to an audience in the Rust Belt or anywhere and point these things out, forcibly. And so, Trump is very good at smearing everybody. Well, fine, let him do that. But his defects on foreign policy and internal policy are manifest now. I think that to me, the fact that he's weakened the NATO alliance is very concerning to me, very concerning. And I think on all these aspects, he's made a real muck-up of foreign policy. He's denigrated his allies, insulted them. Goodness knows why he thinks it's proper to do that, but he does. I mean, he's a disaster all around on many fronts. And I think on all these defects that he has, I think that's the play will resonate. I think, amongst the better educated Republicans, I think they understand that, what a disaster he is. I think and if you can get rid of him, maybe he won't be got rid of by this impeachment. And maybe going through this process was a mistake. But I think his defects are now so obvious and manifest. I think he should be attacked on that ground, because I think really this country, if he is re-elected, it will be a disaster for this country. Because this country cannot pay, it's not paying its way in the world. There's such a degree of poverty in America. There's minimum wages, the guy from, I think, Lamar, Arizona, has vetoed any increase in the minimum wage, for example. People are really hurting in this country. And I see it a lot, in my dealings. And I think everyone feels that these days. And of course, cost of education has gone through the roof, healthcare has gone through the roof. The corporations are now pushing all these extra costs onto ordinary people. So these major, house prices, like especially St. Dad's, have gone through the roof, rents have gone up. Everyone is being hurt by this. Whoever you speak to. And there are no policies or recognition of why this has gone on. It's a fact, actually. The reason why these assets have gone through the roof is all the financial gains in the economy has gone to the 0.01%. They put all their money into these assets, like house prices. It's not gone into the country where it should go. It's not gone into education. It's not gone into infrastructure and so on. So I think these these are the things I think, these gut things, putting food on the table every day, housing, education for kids, are important. I think these key issues, get your base out, sure, absolutely. But attack him on these major defects of his character, of his policies, and so on, as a human being, really. I would attack on all fronts, no holes blind. Just get rid of the guy. Let's get someone who's decent here. How about it, my gal?
I know what it's going to You stole my thunder, John. I was going to speak to the same subject matter as well. But we can always, throw our little 2 cents in at the end here. Okay, first off, when I vote, there are lots of candidates to vote, and when you tend to go with one party, you're looking at, the ideals that party stands for. And I've been in this country a long time, and the Democratic ticket has always been pretty much the way I've gone, although I have voted a Republican once or twice locally. And why is because that seems to be, and definitely was more so in the 70s going forward, the party that truly cared about the civil rights of most people, even though their funding wasn't in place to support Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and everything else that had been passed in the previous decade. So I don't understand, even from the Republican side, working class, and there's some poor Republicans out there as well, why they would, lynch themselves to a party that hasn't been working on those things for their benefit. And as we fast forward here, they've accepted, no matter what's happened since the 1980s, when big business really started to get in and take over, our government, that they seem to have bought this dribble about how businesses, we have to take care of them because they create jobs and so on and so forth, when all the jobs were obviously going away. And so we fast forward to today, and here we have a president in office that is riding, when economic figures are up, they're connected to the previous president in office. He's the one that brought them back. He's the one that brought the stock market from single-digit thousands up to 2 digits, double digits. He's the one that took unemployment from major highs to a reasonable figure to deal with. And that's a fact. And here we are, even today, we stand here, we've had the hearings this week. We've debunked all the nonsense that they've been trying to feed us for years now with legitimate, lifelong employees in our government service that know what the hell they're talking about because they're on the ground, that is all their life has been is studying the countries that they have been assigned to, and they know what is happening locally. That's the point of them being there, okay? And no matter what they said during these hearings, it was enough for many people to accept all the nonsense that a Nunez or the other attorney there, or the guy Jordan or what have you, all we heard out of their mouths was gibberish and reintroducing the same junk that the people had just said. This is not the way it is, okay? And this is what happened. And so this crazy train has to be brought to a halt, and people have to get off. And I would, and as they're doing this, Trump is out in Texas somewhere, sending out a tweet that he's opening up a new Apple plant or something like that. The thing's been open since 2013. It happened again in the Obama administration. Why do people buy the lies from this jokester? I mean, he's a disgrace to the office, okay? And yet, I would ask anyone that supports Donald Trump to give me only five things that you think this president has accomplished that has paid off in nothing but goodness for all people that occupy this country. Because I guarantee you, you won't come up with five that has directly improved the lives, okay, of people, that has been substantial, okay, and will carry on, and they won't be going down from that point, that their America has truly been made great again. I think you'll be challenged to come up with that list, okay? So, and as it relates to states that are trying to deny votes to whomever in that state, okay, if they change those laws, what I would like to see the DNC do is to insist this is their requirement, even though many of these people may have voted before, okay, but now you're saying they have to have this particular ID or this or that. They need to be made to bring vans into neighborhoods. That's what I was heading at before, making it accessible, and there should be no charge. If this is the state's requirement, out of the blue, in order to establish their right to vote, then it's on them. It's their dime. It shouldn't be the voters, because it's a violation of civil rights to change things. How many times since the 15th Amendment put in place, you know, over 50, 60 years ago? How many bloody times do we have to be discussing voting rights for anybody in this country? Okay, you had a great presentation, Ken. Thank you so much.
Is that it? I guess I'm the last one standing. I want to thank Kenneth for a great presentation here today. He got us all thinking, got us all talking, got us all questioning, and that's a good thing. That's what we have to do. There's some problem with the Democrats running for president right now. I thought what you brought up about the two different factions getting together was on target, and that had Hillary used Bernie for his vice president, it would have been a big difference. She'd have won the election. And that has to be remembered in the the two groups have to get together. That is crucial to winning an election. That has to be done. And you gave a good example with Kennedy and Johnson back then. So that has to happen, and I agree with that. Now, addressing Illinois, Wisconsin, I'm from Illinois, and I know that I grew up there, and I understand a lot of things. It's more of a manufacturing area, and it's a high unionized area, and it's an area that people lost a lot of jobs due to automation, and they're susceptible to people like Trump. They're going to they're gonna lead them out of the woods, and they're only lead them into the woods. That's one of the problems. But one of the things that, I actually bring this up, none of our presidential candidates right now are addressing automation at all. This is the big problem in this country. Yang is, but his solution, it doesn't fly. He's gonna give everybody $1,000, that's not gonna work. If everybody had $1 million, nobody would have to work. But then nobody would work, nothing get done. So it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work, and I know that. So what does work? Let's talk about that. Roosevelt in 1938 passed the Fair Labor Standards Act. That was reducing the work week from 60 to 40 hours, and the work day from 10 hours to 8 hours. They did not cut the pay. They got the same take-home pay in 8 hours they did in 10 hours. And it was a federal law, not a state law. It only applied to interstate commerce, and it transformed this country. And within 5 years, big business and labor went to each state legislature to put the states on a shorter workday because Mr. Little Company would eliminate their competition. That's how we had the 8-hour day and the 5-day work week. And this is how the rest of the world followed. And that we were leaders in that respect. And it can also be argued that we won World War II because of it, because we had all women in the workforce. And we were the only country in the world that had the economic generation of that time. And so this is essential and has to be looked at. So we have automation and we have people losing jobs. In my view, I negotiated a 6-hour workday in the rubber industry years ago, and was allowed cutting the pay. It was quite by accident, but it happened. And it taught me a few things. Number one, you don't gain 2 hours leisure time. You already lost it in traffic. You get it back. And that's one of the things that the only way society can possibly share in the wealth of its capacity to produce is in working hours. It's the only way it can be done. That's why Henry Yang's thing doesn't work. Now, in my view, we need a 6-hour day in this country. And it could be passed. The Fair Labor Standards Act could be changed from 8 hours to 6 hours. And if that were to happen, you'd have more people working paying taxes. You'd have less people not working draining taxes. The government would get twofold benefit, increased tax revenue, not raising taxes. There'd be less bills to pay for people that aren't working, that be working. And you could transform this country. And this would satisfy Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and those other areas that are highly manufacturing areas, because they lost so many jobs, it's unreal, and they're losing more every day. And every time a corporation leaves town and goes overseas, they take the jobs with them, and they leave a town. And this is why these people were so akin to voting for Trump when they did. And this has to be addressed. And this is where the Democratic Party can rebuild itself, is out of the labor force. And I was at the first two conventions of the Labor Party, where they didn't even have any candidates, so they were trying to start another party at one time. And that was because the Democratic Party wasn't representing labor. And labor is the basis of that. It's the root cause, it's the root base of the Democratic Party. They don't recognize that they're going to lose. That's why Trump won the last election, let's face it. That's why he was able to garner those votes in those different states. And that has to change. And the Democratic Party would be a lot stronger if it got the labor base back. There's a lot of Republicans in the labor base now because they have been ignored and they're not hurting, and they're hurting. And this is just my thought on the subject. Anyway, I'll give this back to the speaker, and I think he did a great job here today. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. I think a lot of points were raised by some of the comments of other folks were very good. Certainly, you need to focus on economics. You always need to have an economic message that addresses the needs of ordinary working families, and that's important. I think there's a lot of things that the Democrats are talking about that are good. Some more focus on automation ideas, certainly useful, given that we have some plans out there to do really aggressive things on automation. They're talking about self-driving cars and self-driving trucks. That would have a big impact on working people. So we do need to look at that. But one thing on the on some of the one of the comments we had there was on the need of the Democrat to kind of set some requirements to have them pull in vans to help people get the identification they need. That's a great idea, but you have to win to be able to set that rule, right? Because if you don't win, you won't be able to set that rule, and the other side isn't going to voluntarily make it easier for people to get ID. The whole idea is to make it hard for them to get ID so that they can't vote. So that's not going to happen until after you win. But so in the meantime, the Democrats might have to go rent a van and do it themselves. That's what I'm talking about. You can't, even if you think the rules are unfair, it doesn't mean that you can evade them while the other side's in control. You're going to have to work within that context in order to neutralize voter suppression. Then another comment that was heard about there was the gentleman was expressing the belief that the Bernie Sanders votes were Republicans. I actually know a good number of Bernie Sanders supporters. I was in Philadelphia for the convention. I talked to a lot of the young people because their main characteristic was they're very young. Bernie supporters were overwhelmingly young people. I didn't meet one who sounded slightly like a Republican. I've never met a Bernie supporter who sounded even vaguely like a Republican. These are people who are, like I say, they're solidly ideologically in the progressive wing of that overall umbrella that I call the Democratic Party, which is not limited to registered Democrats, like I was saying, because we really have a two-party system. Even people who are outside of the Democratic Party is still their vehicle. That was the point I was trying to make with the on the notion of independence. Because some independents are kind of left-leaning and they are more conservative-leaning independents. And so my point is that I believe the Bernie supporters actually are mostly overwhelmingly hardcore progressives, because I've never met one who wasn't. And trust me, they really are enthusiastic. And they're enthusiastic again in this year in 2020. So at least that's the impression I have of them. Okay, and in general, like I say, this is going to be, we always say this is the most important election in American history. That sentence is so much more true in 2020 than it's probably ever been, probably since the election of 1860. It's really a critical election, because it's going to decide what kind of country we have going forward. Part of the problem, I think, with the current occupant of the White House is there's a fundamental rejection on his part of the ideas on which the country is based. He does not believe in limited government. He believes he has unlimited powers. He admires other heads of state who already have unlimited powers. He's always expressing admiring comments for Putin, for the Turkish president, Kim Jong-un. All of these kind of people are like people he really admires. And I believe, to the extent he is able to, he will push us as far in that direction as he can get. I don't believe his own party is going to rein him in. I never thought they would. I had no expectation that they're going to remove him for office or anything like that. But I think it's still a very good idea that they impeached him, because it's putting a spotlight on a lot of things that he's doing for everybody else who's not necessarily signed up to support him. And that's important. But it's going to be up to the people. Benjamin Franklin said you have a republic if you can keep it. And 2020 is going to decide if we can keep it.
Well, that's it for tonight. Our speaker is still here. They kick us out of here at 10:30. And hope to see you next week. No, not next week. Next week is Thanksgiving. We will not have a meeting. 2 weeks from now we'll have a meeting. 2 weeks. So hope to see you in 2 weeks.
Have a great Thanksgiving.